Let's pick up on this whole idea of the ecumenism in Dr. King's work. Talk a little bit about what inspired him to begin with and how he incorporated ideas from outside of his core Baptist faith, and then what he exuded from that.
Martin Luther King was a student at Morehouse College from 1944 to 1948. During those years, Howard Thurman, who had served on the faculty at Morehouse after having graduated from Morehouse himself, was a frequent speaker in the chapel. And Thurman was the first African American to meet with Gandhi in 1935. He spent 6 months abroad, and Thurman's conversations with Gandhi about the race problem in America and the strategy of nonviolence that Gandhi was utilizing in India really excited Thurman. So he returned and went on a national tour. King heard this and was deeply impressed. He writes about rushing out of the chapel that day to read everything he could get his hands on by Gandhi. He'd already read Thoreau and others, and so he was fascinated with nonviolence as a strategy, but as a larger way of life. And I think that illustrates the ecumenism, a Christian influence profoundly by a Hindu leader. King went on to grow in his religious maturation as he interacted with Malcolm X, with Muslims, and understood those great faith traditions and texts. And of course was a friend of Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Buddhist leader. Obviously Rabbi Abraham Heschel marched with Dr. King. And so I just see in King a wonderful illustration of what today's clergy of all faith traditions should keep in mind as they think about how they're relating to their religious neighbors who are different and to the broader public, displaying that fundamental respect for diversity and learning more firsthand about the truths in other traditions.
Mm-hmm. There's, as we mentioned earlier, so much polarization in the political discourse in this country today, and one's almost tempted to say that that there's no room for this kind of rapprochement. One does not hear it anywhere. What do you think from the events going on in Washington might actually stimulate that? I mean, is there anything from recent history that gives you hope that people are going to set these differences aside and come a little closer together?
Well, I think we are still capable of being surprised by small and large acts, risky gestures toward reconciliation, breaking the ice. When Nelson Mandela and Frederick de Klerk sit down together in South Africa, and that simple gesture leads to a larger truth and reconciliation process in the end. I think that's a wonderful reminder, more contemporary than the civil rights movement, of what is possible. And I think that we occasionally see efforts on the part of the President of the United States and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, but they need to do more. America desperately needs them to do more, but also religious leaders around the nation need to do more in modeling those gestures of outreach, taking risks, moving beyond your familiar comfort zone, and allow your congregation or to see you engaging other faith traditions. In some ways it's a big risk, in some ways it's a very small step that illustrates that dialogue, mutual understanding, not conversion, but understanding is possible.
Trust in good faith, in other words, of your adversary.
Absolutely.
Okay. The final question that I would have, has to do with the whole issue of how far we've come with the issue of race in this country. What do you think, Dr. King? It's a very broad question, I understand, but in the few seconds that we have, what do you think would be Dr. King's take today on how far we have or haven't come in this country?
If you listen to the rhetoric in the I Have a Dream refrain, by the way, Morehouse College now owns Dr. King's 13,000-piece papers, and that speech is in the collection. And as I read those materials, I think he would admit that we've come an enormous distance in actualizing the vision of judging people by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. His children being able to sit with white children and other ethnic communities in respect and sisterhood and brotherhood. So many of those things we take for granted, and we shouldn't. We should recognize that compared with 50 years ago, those have been very significant advances, and I'm proud of America for those advances. Still work to be done, but let's never minimize how far we've come as a nation toward the path of equal justice and reconciliation.
Mm-hmm. In South Africa, just to follow up on that, in the South Africa context, this used to be called petty apartheid, in which there was separation. But in terms of real empowerment and real economic improvements, do you think he'd despair at the economic gap in the relative status of African Americans today?
Absolutely important to underscore this point, that he would worry more, I think, about the economic wealth and income disparities. He'd say, we've accepted this as normal, but it is fundamentally immoral, and we should lose sleep about it, and we should puzzle out ways to change it, figure out policies that enable working people, poor people, the folks who need the education most and should benefit most from hard work are currently not doing so. There's something immoral in that distribution of goods. And we're smart enough to figure this out and to improve this. The question is, do we have the will, the moral will to act?
Dr. Franklin, once again, many, many thanks for coming by today.
I appreciate this. Thanks.